BBC journalist criticised for wrong description of the EU.
And we're joined now by Fraser, who is in Brussels. Christian, we just heard about what's happening in France. What does the picture look like in the rest of Europe?
Well, if you look more widely, Anna, I think two stories can be true of this parliamentary election. Yes, the populist right, hard right, nationalist right, whatever you want to call them, did well across Europe last night, but so did the centre right. And actually, if you look from the Social Democrats centre left to the centre right, through the middle of the parliament, they still hold 450 seats. They're still the power. There's two things to say about this parliament. It doesn't work like a conventional parliament. Legislation is reserved for the European Commission, the executive arm of the EU. They don't like interference from the Parliament. They don't like interference from the European leaders.
Frankly, this BBC journalist's description of the EU is nonsense. Contrary to what Fraser implied, the European Commission is the servant of the EU and not its master. The Commission has no power to pass any legislation. That's the remit of the democratically elected European Parliament, alongside the Council of Ministers comprising the ministers of democratically elected governments of EU member states. Yes, the Commission does draft proposed legislation, but only after close collaboration with involved parties, including the Parliament and the Council. Furthermore, the Commission is ultimately beholden to the European Parliament. The Commission President must be elected by an absolute majority of MEPs, and every Commissioner must be approved or rejected in a strict and democratic vetting process by the Parliament. And MEPs have the democratic power to dismiss the entire Commission at any time.
How is the European Commission elected? One of the first jobs of the new European Parliament after elections is to elect the President of the European Commission. EU countries nominate a candidate, taking into account the European election results and possible nominations by European political parties. Parliament assesses, then votes on that person, who must get an absolute majority. For the other 26 Commissioner jobs, the President-elect and EU countries make a list of candidates. Each country gets one post. Parliament checks candidates are up to the task in special hearings and holds a final vote to approve or reject the Commission as a whole. MEPs vote on any changes in the Commission and have the power to dissolve it.
And the European leaders that Christian referred to are the democratically elected Prime Ministers and Presidents of EU member states. They set the policy agenda of the European Commission. I asked two former British MEPs to respond to the BBC's inaccurate description of the EU. 𝗃𝗏𝗧𝗏 was a Liberal Democrat member of the European Parliament.
There are tens of thousands of EU citizens in the UK. They've paid their taxes, they've paid into our pension pots, and they're paying down our debts. They contribute to our...
How sad that again we hear what amounts to misunderstanding how the European Parliament works. Alarmingly from the BBC, who should know better. The Parliament has co-decision powers with the European Council. What Fraser calls the European leaders are the elected heads of 27 governments. The Commission, Europe's civil service, write the legislation, do all the research and the monitoring behind that legislation, and also have the job of enforcement for the whole of the European Union. It is the Parliament and the Council together that decide what is passed or not, and it is done with a lot of hard work by the MEPs negotiating with other bodies to reach compromises that reflect the voices of their voters. MEPs are the representatives of the voices of citizens. of the European Union, not their governments. That's what the Lisbon Treaty gave us. It is so sad to see this sloppy journalism being repeated and allowed to go unchallenged. It is for this very reason that environmentalists and human rights defenders are so alarmed at the right-wing shift of the Parliament, just because it does have powers over legislation, and it is now likely to pull back on all that good work done over the years defending against climate change and for the rights of citizens. If it was a useless talking shop, we wouldn't all be so worried.
Former MEP Richard Corbett was Labour's leader in the European Parliament.
The chaos, the confusion and the divisions within the British government.
BBC News claimed the European Parliament isn't like an ordinary parliament. In the EU system, legislation is reserved for the European Commission. This is abject nonsense and is rather typical of the misinformation about how the EU works that is so often given in the British media. I am a former member of the European Parliament. I have co-authored books about the European Union, how it works, and indeed about the Parliament itself. I can tell you this: all European legislation requires the approval of the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers. It's a two-chamber system, ministers representing every national government in the European Union and directly elected MEPs of a variety of political persuasions. The European Parliament always amends Commission proposals before it adopts or rejects them, a bit unlike the House of Commons, where the government always gets its way thanks to an inbuilt whipped majority. The European Parliament not just debates but shapes legislation. It's a proper parliament. Some would say a stronger parliament than those rubber stamp parliaments that always do the government's bidding.
I've contacted the BBC to ask if they will issue a correction, and if not, why not? I'm awaiting their reply.